If you followed all the Christian parenting rules and your kids still walked away from the faith, was it your fault? So I was raised in a good Christian home, and as the firstborn, there was likely a bit of experimentation in parenting. They were drawing from their own scripts, but also consulting resources to figure out how to do this whole parenting thing. And my dad actually owned a Christian bookstore for a time, and so you better believe that a lot of those parenting resources were Christian parenting books, where these were the kinds of works that were consulted. And a lot of people in these books claim to unlock the secrets of this ancient text, the Bible, to be able to figure out whatever you need to know about parenting. Because it seemed a lot was at stake. My parents had just 18 years to set me up for a lifetime of faith, of good choices, and whether they were successful depends on your definition, because I am still a believer, but I don't hold to much of the theology and worldview they passed down. My parents gave me a pretty good childhood. There's no denying that. I'm not arguing against that today. And I know they tried their best, but some of the harshest critics of Christian parenting from the Christian parenting empire might disagree. All because I turned out crazy enough, not exactly like the perfect conservative evangelical Christian adult that this empire would prefer. In this episode, we're talking about good Christian parenting and all the myths that come with that. We'll explore the promises of many of the faith-based parenting manuals and then dive into some of the truly questionable ideas they promote. We have two guests today for the first time ever on Christianity Without Compromise. We have Marissa Franks Burt, a novelist, editor, and teacher. She holds an MA in theological studies from Columbia International University and is the co-host of the At Home with the Lectionary podcast. Marissa and her husband are raising 6 children. And we have Kelsey McGinnis, a musicologist, educator, and journalist who writes about worship and Christian subculture. She earned her PhD from the University of Iowa and teaches as adjunct professor at Grandview University in Kelsey is also a correspondent for Christianity Today.
It's Des Moines, by the way.
Yeah, exactly. I realized immediately that was a word I don't say very often.
Hey, you're a fellow Midwesterner. I feel like Des Moines is like a one you should know at this point.
I'm pretty south. I don't go up there, We don't go past really the Bible funny. Belt there. That's my protective line. Just kidding.
Well, okay. Now you know.
Welcome to Christianity Without Compromise. I'm your host, Jake Doberenz, and in each episode we focus on Jesus alone, and not the other idols we put in his place. Now let's start smashing those idols.
Thank you for having us. We're glad to be with you today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kelsey and Marissa. We do appreciate it. And as I said, this is the first time with 2 guests, so I'm learning. You guys have done this together, so you guys are old pros, Maybe you have it all figured out now, so you could teach me a thing or two. But we're just going to kind of go through and see what happens. But I do appreciate you guys being here. Glad to connect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for having us.
And I want to start with the origin story of the book. I think that's a good place to start here. We love to start with stories on Christianity Without Compromise. So how did you two team up and come up with this idea for the book, and then, write the book and publish it and all that? What's their origin story here?
Oh, the short version is we met on Twitter. So that's kind of a fun, bright spot of online connectivity. But at the time we met, for a couple of years, I had been researching and working on a novel set in the stay-at-home daughterhood movement of Christian dominionism. And in my research for that book, I was really struck by the way distorted theology enables abuse. And at the same time, my denomination was going through, like so many others have in recent years, allegations of a failure to respond properly to abuse. And so was seeing this in church family systems as well. And because I'm married to a pastor and have been in parish ministry for a couple decades, was also seeing at the same time disconnection and estrangement in Christian families that they were experiencing with a lot of isolation and shame. And so all of these things together combined to make me think, what if we examined, like, what would that conversation be like if we could say, what were families told over and over and over again was the right way to parent, the Christian way to parent, the way to have a godly family? Because we all know that for decades, these ideas have circulated and found traction. And what was the fruit of that? How is that playing out in families today? And so those questions were kind of rumbling around in my imagination. And one day on Twitter, a friend of mine said, if you could write a book about anything, what niche topic would you explore? And so I tried to like articulate the concept for this book in a single tweet, but the response was pretty immediate. People were saying, I would read that. We need that book. I wanted that book when I became a parent, a number of responses. And as I dug around a little bit, I was kind of surprised to discover that this was something that hadn't been critically examined before. There were no books discussing it from this angle. There were communities of people connecting online to share some of their experiences and process their experiences. And then I got a DM from Kelsey.
That was from me. So we connected when I saw that tweet. I had years ago started keeping my own weird little internal documents and notes when my oldest was about a year old, and I started looking at parenting resources. I mean, I think some people come to those at different points. Some people start reading them before they have a baby. I really didn't until I had a toddler, and I realized, oh, I don't actually know how I should be responding to some of these things. My child can talk all of a sudden and ask for things. And I found that like my internalized beliefs about children from back when I was a child that were sort of handed down to me in evangelical circles started bubbling up in ways that I didn't necessarily expect, in ways that made me wonder, like, wait a second, do I need to respond to this meltdown as if it's like an act of defiance? Or is there another way I can see this? I felt like what I had inherited was that anything that my child does that appears to be in conflict with what I'm trying to get them to do is defiance of some kind or sin of some kind. And I didn't know how else to view it. So I went looking at Christian parenting resources, some of it which had been given to me. And I just found myself really uncomfortable with what was on offer there. And so I went looking at more mainstream sources that some of my friends were reading or podcasts they were listening to. And the gulf between these two like worlds of resources was huge. I mean, I found myself encountering things like terms for developmentally appropriate behavior, right? This idea that like when children are having a hard time, they're not necessarily rebelling against you. They're just having a hard time because they're children. And that was like a new concept to me. Now, some people, there are probably plenty of Christians who that was not a revelation for. But for whatever reason, I felt like that was offering me something that I hadn't encountered before. And then I found myself really anxious because I had this other set of resources that were saying, don't give sin a pass. Your instinct is going to be permissive, and you will put your child's soul in danger if you do this. And so I just started working, my husband and I both started working through that and keeping notes and taking notes in the margins of a whole bunch of parenting books. Not really with any idea what we would ever do with it. We're both academics, so that was sort of our impulse to do that. And then they just kind of sat for a while, and we felt like we reached a place where we kind of left Christian parenting resources behind and found things that worked for us and our children and just kind of let it be. And then I saw Marissa's tweet years later, and I responded and I said, hey, I write for Christianity Today, mostly about music and worship culture and Christian media. But I also have all these notes from years of just kind of looking at these things. If it would be useful, here are these notes, and we can connect via, I don't know, Zoom or whatever if you'd like. And that's what we did. And really quickly realized that we sort of brought two different voices and skill sets to this that were complementary in a lot of ways, and that we might actually work well together. We liked each other a lot, which is, not always the case when you meet someone on Twitter. And so we started putting together a book proposal. I had never written a book. Marissa has written many books. So I benefited from that expertise. And we went from there.
Nice. Hey, good origin story there. And, it just goes to show that, Twitter can produce good things.
It can.
Less and less these days, it seems. This was 2 years ago now.
Yeah, exactly. That's fair. It is interesting. The early days of my show, like all my guests, I was like, I say, oh, I found you on Twitter. We connected on Twitter. And nowadays it's, oh, we connected on Threads. So it's shifted over the life cycle of this podcast, which is interesting. Well, thanks for setting the scene for us. We got to know a little bit about your backgrounds, how we all came here, and why you decided to team up on this project. So let's talk about kind of the chief focus today. And obviously, a lot of different angles we can go to in your book here, but I want to talk about this kind of prosperity gospel-like promise that if you just get the parenting right, all will be well, the results will be right, correct input equals this desirable output. And you guys talk about this verse, Proverbs 22:6. So what's the danger behind some of the common interpretations here in how people kind of read that particular verse?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it really starts with the premise that there is a one-size-fits-all way to parent that can guarantee certain results. And that's understandably a very appealing promise, particularly to new parents, new converts, or any parent going through a hard time with their child, right? Like, I think those are the key moments when a parent's going to reach for a parenting resource, right? If things are going well, they're probably just going to continue on with what they're doing. So it can be very appealing to pick up a resource, as so many of these do, that says, we have got some rock solid advice for you, based not on our opinions, but the word of God. It is biblical authority for you. And if you get this right, they usually pull two levers: prevent bad things from happening. And often these resources will paint vividly worst case scenarios, usually tied into the social panics of the day, that say, this is going to happen to your child if you don't parent the Christian way. So they pulled on parental fears. And also they pulled the lever of parental longings and aspirations and said, if you get this right, you can ensure a godly legacy, have generations of Christians around your holiday table. You can even maybe change the culture and the nation in a godly way. So they pulled on these really powerful motivators in moments of vulnerability and were very effective marketers. And that combination together can build some global ministry empires that have resonance for decades. And I think all those things together are supported by a single Bible verse like this to say, oh yeah, don't peek behind the curtain here. This is just God's way. Trust God's word on this. What would you add, Kelsey, to that?
Yeah, there so many of these books make different kinds of promises and different kinds of threats. It's really interesting. And there are some commonalities, some common things, like in the 70s, there was a lot of panic around, youth and rebellion and anti-authoritarian behavior. And so a common scare tactic would be to talk about crime, right? Talk about your child is going to turn out to be a criminal if you don't do these things. If you can instill in them a respect for authority from a very young age, they will be good, well-behaved citizens, right? And I do think it's remarkable when you go looking back at these resources, how tied together the idea of like a good, well-behaved citizen and a good Christian, they're very closely tied together. And parents are being scared into being afraid their children are going to be delinquents, basically. And I also think some of these promises, even in the ones that don't necessarily promise your children will be faithful for life, there is a promise made to parents that you will be safe. Like, if you do this the one right way and you are an obedient servant, you will get the reward of some kind for that. Or if not a reward, you will be safe from condemnation because at least you've done it the right way. Like, people like Chuck Swindoll encourage parents to put the principle of parental authority over everything else. You have to choose. He says you choose the principle over the person. There's this appeal to parent, you must be good. And if you are good, if you follow this model, if you do this the right way, you will be safe. You will be good. And so these promises take many different forms. They morph in some ways that I find troubling in some cases because of how they scare parents or appeal to that desire to be good and obedient themselves. Yeah, there are a lot of other things we could talk about, but those are the things that stick out to me as I read these resources.
Ooh, boy, yeah. We talk about it on the show a lot. I do a lot of research. My background is more in the biblical studies side of things. Just the really gross way we try to fit in whatever we want into the Bible to make it, or the way I put it a lot is we ask the wrong questions to the Bible. We ask these questions and we say we can get out X, that seems like another case of you're squeezing out some weird things. And I do want to talk about here in a second, like, we can't cover all of them, but some of the red flags, some of the particular issues you found in surveying these hundreds of parenting books and things. And again, a lot to cover, but that's why people have to go buy the book, get the rest of the story, get all the real details there. So we'll save some. But I'm wondering if we can focus on this idea of authority, the ways that these books talk about authority, and I know that kind of intersects in a couple different chapters, some different things you have there in the book, so you can kind of take that how you want to. I'll give you a little bit of some flexibility there to talk about maybe what you want to. But what are these evangelical parenting empire marketing stuff saying about parental authority over children? And then what's your critique of that?
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of start from the 1970 Dare to Discipline, James Dobson's first book, angle. There is kind of a cohort of Christian parenting writers. Ann Holbert, who's another journalist, has written about this. She describes them as parent-centered, and that's her way of saying these are people who are concerned first and foremost with parental authority and with telling parents to assert that authority and protect that authority above everything else. And there are different ways these authors articulate why that is important. I think one thing that will surprise people who are familiar with James Dobson but have not read Dare to Discipline is that book is very much not a Christian parenting book in the way that we might think of it, because most of that book does not use proof texts. It's not even really appealing to scripture or to godliness. It's appealing to good behavior and law and order. Messages that rhyme a lot more with political messaging of the time that was coming from the emerging religious right. So there are a lot of ways that his message rhymes with like Richard Nixon's campaign messaging, right? Like, this is a book about behavior, law and order, and authority. Later on, you get more kind of biblical authority language with people like Ted Tripp. And I'll let Marissa talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and Ted Tripp shows up in the kind of 90s as his area of prominence, but he is very popular even to this day. His resource, Shepherding a Child's Heart, is highly recommended in Christian circles. And he was heavily influenced by the Nouthetic or biblical counseling movement. So really ties into what you were saying, Jake, this movement that perceived the Bible as the instruction manual for life. So really was looking for explicit instruction for every area of modern life in Bible verses. And that shows up in a lot of family life resources, both parenting and marriage resources alike, because one is an interpretive approach, right? Like, if you come to the Bible as a story, you will maybe write as a narrative, most of the Bible comes in narrative form, you will maybe recognize there's not a lot of parenting or marriage advice in there. There's families are described, but that's a different thing than saying there's direct instruction. But the nouthetic lens really had people saying, who had a high regard for scripture, saying it's sufficient for everything. There is going to be parenting advice in here, and looking for that, which is how you end up with people like Ted Tripp saying, parents, here's a verse about Abraham and his authority. Therefore, you parents are agents of God in your family. And there's a number of things like that happening when you get in these resources, where there will be a Bible verse that really exegetically and hermeneutically speaking is untethered from anything else, but it will be served up to enforce these presuppositions, like there is a God ordained hierarchy in the home. You maybe have seen the umbrella of authority diagram somewhere online, where it's kind of got the pastor, the Jesus umbrella or the Christ umbrella, then like a pastor umbrella, then like the husband, then the wife, and at the bottom, the children. And there are other iterations of this. Ted Tripp describes it as a circle of blessing that your child's in. But the idea is there's a creation order that God has ordained for families and society. And if you stay in that order, under the authority above you, which for children is your parents, for a wife, it's her husband, for the husband, it's sometimes the pastor, but usually just direct to God. If you stay under that authority structure, you'll be safe. If you step out from under it, you are vulnerable. Bill Gothard, who did the original umbrellas image, said, you'll be vulnerable to satanic attack. That was kind of his interpretation. Ted Tripp more is like, if your child's outside the circle of blessing, things won't go well for them. Again, kind of pulling on different Old Testament verses to say bad things might happen, or just they won't be very successful in life. So the Bible is used very effectively. Proof texted verses are used very effectively to appeal to people who typically believed in the inerrancy of scripture. That movement was also happening around this time. Who maybe held to complementarian norms. That movement was also happening around this time. So these are relevant ingredients that were kind of reinforcing these ideas for families picking up like a Christian self-help resource. Oh, this sounds familiar, but saying authority is central. You got to make sure authority is preserved and make sure the people are falling in line with that authority. For children, this consistently looked like instant, unquestioning compliance to parental authority was the expectation that parents had for how their children should respond, and was given for children to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would add to that too, when like there are little drops of this in some of these resources that when you're looking for them, you realize, oh, this is kind of inventing a way of talking about families and selling its biblicism. Like Larry Christensen, the author of The Christian Family, just sort of drops in. If we take seriously the father's priestly role in the family, he talks about, the father as a priest of the family. Well, that's a really big leap to then start talking about father as priest and everyone under him and this spiritual mediator role that fathers suddenly have, as opposed to a family as a whole unit being under God together. That's a very specific way of thinking about how a family ought to function. And I mean, people in the church have used a number of metaphors to describe how a family is supposed to function over the centuries. So that is nothing new. But what is slightly new in the 20th century Christian publishing world is the mass marketing of it as the one way, as more than a metaphor, as like an instruction manual that will get you particular results. It's beyond a metaphor for understanding what a father might do. And it's applying it to the minutia of daily life with your children in ways that are really specific to like American self-help books in a way that I think can be very problematic.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely very problematic. And I think that's good you bring up the metaphor thing. A lot of this actually reminds me of my master's thesis, which is about how Paul uses children as a metaphor in 1 Corinthians. Where there's some interesting intersections there, especially because you guys have a chapter about like, hey, are kids like human beings? Like, do they deserve boundaries and things like that?
Mm-hmm.
And that ancient world was so much that they're subhuman. Like
Mm.
you're not like real until you can contribute to the civilization. And it's
Mhm.
like, why are we digging up? I thought we moved beyond the Greco-Roman views of things, but no, not necessarily,
Mhm.
according to your research in some of these books. So, boy, we could go all day down some of these rabbit holes. Why don't we turn a little bit to talk about your alternative, or what do you where do you want people to go instead of some of these resources? What is the better, healthier way for Christians to navigate parenting? Which again,
Mhm.
that could be a lot, but let's get some highlights going here.
Yeah, well, I think a piece of it begins with setting aside this myth that there is one right way and you need to figure out and be on it. And you, parent, need to make sure you're obeying and figuring it out. I think a first place is setting that aside and saying, there's tremendous freedom for the Christian parent. We will often say that. Uh, Devout parents looking for biblical advice, there's very little direct parenting instruction. What we do have in the New Testament is Christian ideas for relational principles that apply to everyone, with mutual respect, with the one anothering verses that treat one another with compassion and forbearance, that restore the one who sins gently, that see people as our neighbors, including our smallest and newest neighbors, that position authority, if we want to call that. Jesus's model for that is service. Jesus's model for leadership is not to lord it over people in some kind of hierarchy, but to serve, and to consider the needs of the vulnerable and consider the needs of others is more important for than yourself. So a number of these things for people who are looking for biblical, whatever whatever that term, however that term lands with people, biblical principles, there is a sense that mutual respect and regard for children as our brothers and sisters in Christ there's an invitation there. Beyond that, there is tremendous freedom regarding methodology for parents to critically examine and consider ideas that suit their own temperaments, their family culture, the temperaments and unique needs of their individual children. And this is something largely absent from popular Christian parenting resources, because if there is a guidebook, then it kind of doesn't matter the individual needs of the person in front of you. They just need to get in line, right? And so it requires setting that aside to really free people up to say, okay, this is a whole paradigm shift, to say, from a parental perspective, this individual child has been entrusted to my care for a short time. How do I serve them well? And that involves a kind of curiosity about developmental stages of childhood, like how do children grow from immaturity to maturity? Some things that take us outside of the realm of your authority is the most important and obedience is the most important, into this is another person and a human being worthy of dignity and respect. I am entrusted with their well-being and care, and that includes correction, teaching, instruction, a number of things, but parents can be freed up to survey resources that aren't only Christian resources. They can learn from child development experts, social scientists, and others that can help equip them in this role that is not short term in the sense that the parent-child relationship continues throughout life, but this particular acute moment of parenting where a parent is in any kind of leadership or authority role is very short. Uh, it is not there. There is an off ramp to that eventually, which a lot of Christian parenting resources don't note. There is an expectation that this kind of modeled control and obedience will kind of continue in perpetuity. So that's an important ingredient and perspective shifter to say, this is my role here is short term. Like, how do I serve the child in the long term? What would you say? Because we do try and avoid giving a lot of prescriptive advice. What would you say to that, Kelsey?
Yeah, I mean, a number of things. The one that's sticking out to me right now is, I mean, just given the weird political moment we're in and the weird political moment that sort of catapulted James Dobson, is that, Christian parents were sort of told to see their parenting choices as a social and political project. like something that could help right the ship of culture. And I think anytime you start, and I can say this as a parent, anytime I start catastrophizing outward about like the relationship I have with my child, what does this mean for their future? What does this mean for the future of society? What if everyone does this? Or that just turns parenting into this weird social project that becomes quickly so removed from your personal relationship with the child in front of you. And one thing that I think these resources can do when they are applied to their extent, if you're someone who really earnestly wants to follow the letter of the law presented by these books, you can end up robbed of a relationship with your child because you aren't responding to the child. You're filtering everything through the ideas in these books and kind of responding according to different scripts or different big ideas or different signs of what might be going on deep down in the depths of your child's heart. What sin struggles are underlying this? You start filtering things through that. And I think that can really destroy intimacy. It can get in the way of secure attachment. I am, not a child psychologist, so I don't want to venture into the science of all of that. But I think just from a purely connection-oriented perspective, there's a lot of harm that can be done there. And so I think we want to encourage parents not to let these resources become that ever-present filter all the time. And to be fair, different people are going to struggle with that to differing degrees, right? I often get the question, like, is this book part of you unpacking your childhood? And I can honestly say no. Like, these books were all present in my household, but for whatever reason, my parents, the people they are, their temperaments, their spiritual health, they were really able to, at least with me, pick and choose things and let other things fall away and let the relationship be the first thing. Some people are going to be better equipped for that. Others, it's going to be hard. And I think that is a really difficult task as a parent, to be able to tell, where am I letting these resources get in the way? Like, am I spending so much time looking at influencer content on Instagram that my relationship with my child is being mixed up in what this influencer is telling me I should be really concerned about? This can go for anything from like what your child is eating to how much screen time they're getting, right? Like, and there's no one size fits all to dealing with that problem. But it's so easy when you want to do things the right way as a parent to let these resources become that voice in your head that keeps you from trusting yourself as someone who is put into your child's life to be a guide, a teacher, a parent in loving relationship.
Well, I really appreciate the freedom that you're offering parents. I'm not a parent myself, but you guys are. You have mentioned multiple times. There's no one size fits all. Use some other resources. I think that's just a really good, freeing perspective to have. I think that is definitely something we can all take away, whether a parent or not. Just a reminder of, they're like, does God want me to be an accountant or a doctor? You can do either. Whatever.
You're free.
There's not always a super clear path forward. So that is a really, really good reminder. And I mean, I am, from when this episode comes out in 11 days, I will be marrying a early childhood development major. So she loves all that stuff too about.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
And best
That's
wishes
so
and all that. It's very exciting. You're in the like ramp up. This is probably intense days. 11 days.
No
yes. From when the episode comes out. So we're
okay.
Yeah,
so you haven't hit the whirlwind yet. Okay.
Not quite. That's why we record ahead of time.
Sorry.
I'm almost done with the rest of the year. But I digress. All that to say is that that's something she reminds me a lot, is like, hey, well, we've literally done studies and shown this is this and that is that. Maybe we should listen to some of this stuff and things like that. But that can make people uncomfortable. And so this is kind of the segue into my last question here, is when you start picking apart a childhood or somebody's parenting strategies or whatever, it can make people feel weird. And I've seen this in my own home with my parents, who sometimes I'll say, well, yeah, I'm not going to do this with my kids. And then there's maybe a little bit of a mini freak out or something. People feel uneasy about this. And maybe there's some guilt too. Like, there are things, and my parents have told me this, there are things that they regret. They'll fully admit that. Like, so I guess, what do you say? What do you say to people that read this and be like, oh man, but I did XYZ to my kid, or in my childhood this happened? What do you say with people that get all these feelings when you start questioning what for some people was just the one way to do it, was just the reality?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a understandable response. Parenting in general is triggering. So it does bring up a number of different things, and it's also vulnerable. So I think there can be fragility and defensiveness, right? A critique can be an implied personal critique, right? Like it can be that. I would say two things given this context of Christian parenting. Make this a really relevant and insightful question, because when families have been served up this idea that there is one way to get a desired result, this prosperity gospel parenting promise, if you don't get that result, if something happens that is not the desired outcome, if the ideas are biblical and godly, then the problem must be user error. It must be the parent did something wrong, or there's something uniquely problematic about the child that it didn't work for them. So already there's this unquestionability of the resources that have been presented as God's way with biblical authority that will lay the receipt entirely at the feet of the families. And that is a heavy yoke to bear that often comes with a lot of isolation and shame, particularly for people who are still in communities that value that level of biblical certainty and obedience, right? You are going to feel ashamed and isolated if it didn't work in your family, particularly from the parental perspective. So first, I would say to encourage people that it does require an element of deconstruction, because these ideas were wrapped up with ideas about God, which I would encourage particularly other Christians does not necessarily need to be a scary thing. I personally think it's a biblical concept. We see it in 1 Corinthians 3, this idea that you got to detangle the different things teachers have told you that have been built up on the foundation of Jesus. The foundation of Jesus will hold. He will hold, but a lot of the cultural ideas we build up should be subject to scrutiny, should be tested, the fruit should be examined. So I would encourage people to maybe not be afraid of that, even though it can feel like free fall, if this is something you believed and operated by for decades. But I do think that if people are willing to take that kind of courageous inventory, what they will find on the other side of that is not kind of like a cosmic spanking for failing to obey correctly and to do it perfectly. I think they will find an invitation out of that really heavy yoke. And I think they will find that they maybe aren't as alone as they feel. We certainly, as we've spoken with people, as we interviewed people while we were writing, I think estrangement, difficulty in relationships, conflict are an inevitable byproduct of some of these teachings that were offered to people. That is kind of like, unless people only picked and choose different things, but if they applied things consistently, that is probably down the road, are these points of tension when an adult child does find autonomy and independence and say, I am going to live my life the way I want to. And a parent who has practiced and trained themselves up day in and day out to expect compliance, there will be points of tension. So you're probably not alone. And the first step forward is an honest reckoning and looking to cultivate maybe some of the things that are missing from a family relationship toolbox that aren't in these resources. How to listen to someone who believes different things than you, how to tolerate difference, how to prioritize the person over the principal. Some of the things that maybe were diametrically opposed to the advice given, but are essential for adult human relationships and healthy human relationships. So I don't know. I think we can't make promised guaranteed outcomes. Obviously, we've heard from people who have been able to successfully navigate that and learn how to move forward in a different direction. We have heard from people who have experienced a lot of grief, anger, and regret, and have really long-term relational consequences. And that's a very painful reality here too. And it's why we use the language of betrayal, that these promises betrayed entire families. That's something Christian communities, I think, can collectively reckon with. But I do think the good news here is for anyone wanting to step into freedom, is that freedom and grace taste good. And there's grace for parents as well to say, we can all kind of maybe be done with this like perfectionistic submission, obedience, like I really have to get it right or else I'm in trouble. If we move past that, there's grace for parents as well to say, oh, I can safely acknowledge mistakes and I can attempt repair. It's not the end of the road here, so I need to double down and defend. I can learn how to relate in different ways. What would you add, Kelsey?
Yeah, I think I would echo everything you said and just say that we really try not to make this a book about shaming parents who bought these books and implemented them. That's not what this book is about. It's not about heaping shame on parents who made certain choices because that was the norm in their community. It is really about looking at the words in these resources and saying some of these claims are simply false. Some of them are just made from places of personal preference and political position. And it's a forward-looking book. And we do hear from parents who regret decisions that they've made and are trying to repair relationships. And as with anything else, there's no one size fits all for that either. In some cases, that repair is really difficult. In some cases, that repair has not come. In some cases, the repair has been a beautiful process. And I wouldn't even say there is like a common thread through all of that either. It's just difficulty. And I think that difficulty is part of the fruit of this market of resources. It has created confusion, difficulty, and outcomes that just feel unfair for some parents who feel like they're now reaping fruit that is the opposite of what they were promised. Some people in their community aren't reaping that fruit. Some people's kids seem to be doing fine. Some people's kids are really struggling. It's just a breeding ground for confusion and resentment and fear. And my fear is that is going to turn into a whole nother generation of parents who are looking, well, they obviously did something horribly wrong. Who's going to tell us? Who's going to discover the thing? That kind of environment can create a breeding ground for just more and more of these resources. So we want this to be a forward-looking book. We want it to be a forward-looking book that pushes people again toward freedom and not just toward another hamster wheel of parenting resources and trying to do things. And I realize that's difficult. I am a parent of young kids, and I realize that sometimes you do just want someone to tell you what to do. It would be easier. But relationship is hard, and it is more like gardening than programming, right?
Well, thank you guys so much for your grace that you've given people, parents, children, whatever. Appreciate that. As you were talking, I do want to point my audience to some past and future episodes because I looked it up exactly a year ago from the release of this episode. Dr. Scott McKnight was on the show, and he talked about deconstruction in his book, Invisible Jesus. There's some stuff there I think that can also help us wrestle with this idea of deconstructing some of the traditions and some of the things that you grew up thinking was the right way, and maybe they're not so helpful. So go back. That was actually episode 11 on 11/11 of 2024. So go check that episode out. And then, to my audience, stay tuned for next week, because I already know what next week's episode is going to be. and Sunita Teese is going to talk about parenting neurodivergent kids and motherhood and things like that. So that'll be another way to continue the conversation, more with things that I don't know anything about, but I get to learn from my guests because I don't have the direct experiences. So it's great. Love having this conversation today, of course. And I heard that you guys have like a book or something. We are recording this in the past, so it'll be out. I know. I'm sure it'll have sold millions of copies beyond like the printing or whatever. But talk about that. Where do you want to send people for the book and for your own individual worlds?
Yes, our book, The Myth of Good Christian Parenting, is out from Brazos Press. You can order it wherever you get books. If you do purchase the book, please read it and leave a review somewhere. That's really helpful for us to find other readers. Yeah, and both of us have writing elsewhere. We both have Substacks where you can find us writing about a number of other things. Like I said, I write a lot about music and church culture and Christian media. You can find us both across social media platforms. We both do quite a bit of content on Instagram and Threads. I think we are both still on
even Twitter
X. Yes, I do a lot less there these days, but I am still findable there.
Yeah, we'll send along some links if people are interested, whatever you want to put in your show notes. But yeah, you can find us across social media, and we have now a backlog of talking about these topics. If it's of interest to you, as we were writing the book, listeners, we just talked through a lot of these things. We have some deep dives on some of the resources. We co-hosted a season of a podcast called In the Church Library, where we talk about some of the individual resources. So we kind of have a online appendix to the book if you're interested in learning about these ideas from a more visual media. You can find us there. And yeah, we're thrilled for the book to be out. It'll be out ebook, print, and audiobook. And thank you for reading it. Thank you for sharing it with people who need to hear, who you think would enjoy this conversation as well.
Marissa read the audiobook, so you should definitely,
it was so
if you're an
fun,
audiobook person,
I had so much.
You will really enjoy it.
It's like childhood dream unlocked. So it's very fun. Thank you.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, phenomenal. We do have one final question we ask all our guests, and you guys will each get a chance here to talk about it. So let me read the question that everybody's gotten pretty much since the beginning of the podcast. So here it is. As we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
I'm going to punt this one to the person who's in ministry first.
Well, given everything we have just talked about, I would suggest, since you asked for practical action, I will give one with reticence because, wow, I am pretty treadmill adverse these days, spiritual treadmill. And I know that's not what you're asking. I know you're asking for helpful things, but as someone who, in earlier days would have listened to a podcast like this and been like, well, there's my to-do list for the week. I want to speak to those people and say, rest in Christ. And I would encourage you, if it needs to be practical, to maybe set aside a small sliver of time, 10, 15 minutes. And whether that's sitting outside in the beauty of nature or sitting in silence or listening to music that stirs your soul, something that maybe isn't cerebral, that invites you to rest in the presence of Christ and set aside some of the to-do list. And that is a way of being faithful to abide in him.
I mean, I think I'm always hesitant to give any kind of spiritual advice, just as a general rule. But one thing I've been thinking about a lot lately as someone who writes publicly, I write for Christianity Today and spend a lot of time thinking about big picture church questions that reach beyond my locality, right, outside of my local body. And I find myself again and again convicted that I want the people who take up the most space in my mind and my heart to be people I am in embodied community with, who can speak into my life and I can actually speak into theirs from a place of love and knowing. Not that that's totally impossible with people you know on the internet, but I think in the just content-drenched, screen-drenched existence that we have now, I find myself wanting to be more oriented toward the people who I can make a meal for, hold their children, visit them in the hospital, have a conversation with over coffee. And that's something I am working on. So I would suggest working on that as well, if that's something that resonates with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. We could talk a lot more about this topic. And then you guys also have your own unique backgrounds, expertise. Kelsey, I want to talk Newsboys, or something crazy sometime. I got some questions.
Yeah.
I'm also an author myself. I have some middle grade books that are crazy.
Really?
There's all sorts of things we could talk about.
Yeah.
I have really highbrow stuff like superheroes that shoot ice cream out of their hands. So
I love it.
Amazing.
I'm going to check it out. I love middle grade fiction, so I love it.
Too. I'm a grown man that reads it, but it's fine because I write
it.
Yeah. Anyway, there's a lot we could talk. We might have to have more conversations in the future, of course. And once you're on the show, you're a friend of the show, and that means I'll hype you up. I will review your book.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
All that fun stuff, because I just like to be nice like that. Everybody else should do that too.
Thank you.
And speaking of that, people should review this show, this episode, spread the word. I always like to give a sharing challenge of who can you share this episode with, because there might be somebody that comes to mind or something. For me, I'm thinking like, hey, this is a good one to share with parents, whether they're actively parenting kids and maybe need to understand they have some freedom here, or maybe people that their kids have gone away from the house and maybe they need some peace now. And like that last message you guys really gave us. So share that with anybody that comes to mind, maybe in those categories. Great. But Kelsey, Marissa, thank you so much for being on Christianity Without Compromise. You definitely helped us do what we do on the show, which is get towards that Jesus-centered faith without all the other junk and stuff that clouds around it that is just not helpful and just a big distraction. So thank you so very much.
Yeah,
thank you. This was great.
Thank you for listening to Christianity Without Compromise. We just had a great episode, and I encourage you to put into practice the wisdom and advice that you received. Please subscribe to the podcast and newsletter at jakedoberenz.substack.com. That way, right in your inbox, every Tuesday you'll receive the new episode, and on Fridays you'll receive a newsletter written by me that tells a funny or interesting story with a spiritual point. This episode was recorded by me, Jake Doberenz, in conjunction with Theophany Media, my podcast production company. Please rate and review the show on your favorite podcast player, and don't forget to share your favorite episodes with your friends and your enemies. Thank you so much for all your support, and we look forward to bringing you another great episode next week.